I'm going to give this a try. Bienvenidos a mi presentación sobre la alerta y la edición de contexto. Welcome to my presentation, and thanks for coming. We're going to talk about what makes for good alerts, what makes for good context. The title of this talk is near and dear to my heart because I hate waking up, and if I have to wake up, it better be for good reason. So real quick about me, I'm a senior operations engineer at Etsy. One of the things I really like about Etsy is that all of our efforts are focused on reimagining commerce in ways that build a more fulfilling and lasting world. And we do that by being the largest online marketplace for handmade and vintage goods. And last year alone, Etsy sellers, over 1 million active sellers, grossed over $1.3 billion. It's pretty significant. And this pretty much sums up how I feel about writing alerts. Another nice thing about working at Etsy is I get to work on really interesting and tough problems, such as alert design. And alert design is not a solved problem, and it does intrigue me greatly. So a couple things that I hope that when you leave here today, you're thinking about, right? Just two things. What makes for good content? What sort of ideas do you have, and can we share about adding good content? And that means something different to each of us, depending on what it is that we're doing. And probably most importantly is that computers can and should augment our work. If I am going to get woken up by a computer, it better do some work on my behalf before I even have to get out of bed. Finally, context is clarity. Because when I first wake up, I'm very, very slow to wake up. I'm definitely not smart. I mean, I can barely navigate from my bed down to my computer. So if I've got to wake up, show me why I'm waking up. So why add context? Isn't it simply enough for us to just be alerted? Right? We wrote these checks. Something's wrong. An alert should be plenty. Right? If things are broken, I just need to know that. And I think part of that idea that sometimes alerts are just enough is because there really are no good alerts. If everything's working fine, everything's green, there's no reason for anything to, there's no reason for an engineer to wake up. Because there's this general expectation that an alert is a bad thing. But I posit that not all alerts have to be critical. Not all alerts have got to be catastrophic. So we use thresholds a lot, and I think this is probably why we have issues around how our alerting systems work, because thresholds have some weaknesses to them, but we do still rely on them heavily. And I think that if you decouple the idea from the idea of using thresholds for alerting and how to design these alerts better, you can start to think that, you start to realize that not all alerts are indicative of total failure. So when I'm driving down the road, and the gas light on the dashboard goes off, it doesn't mean that my car is going to fall apart around me on the highway. It's an early warning indicator. In fact, it's just an indicator that something could go wrong later. It's still useful, but it doesn't mean that I've got to pull over to the gas station right away, find a mechanic, jack it up, and have some work done. This is pretty important, I think. Alert fatigue is a big deal. Lots of times we're getting a lot of alerts, but they're not really doing anything for us. They're not telling us anything. They're unactionable, right? Maybe they're alerts that have been around for years and people have forgotten about them, nobody cares about them. And you start to ignore those, which is not a good thing. When I'm on call, I don't know, who here is on call? How about right now? Okay, good number. Are you enjoying the conference as much as you think you could if you were not on call? A little bit. He's anxious, right? Yeah, I mean, he could get paged right now. He's distracted, and that's what happens. It happens whether or not you're in the office or even if you work remotely. You can't focus on your work as much because you know at any minute you're going to get paged. It might even mean that you can't sleep as well. I sleep really well the Friday after my on-call is over. My jawbone shows me. I've got the data to show that I go in the deepest sleep the night immediately after my own call, because your sense of awareness is heightened. You know that something bad could happen at any moment, and you have to respond. So you do lose sleep. You do get woken up, right? And this, of course, has cascading effects on how you're able to focus on your work. The longer your on-call rotation goes, the less able you are to handle distractions and focus. And a lot of this fatigue, I think, is really caused by the lack of context that's in the alerts. You get an alert that says, this thing is critical. You know you should care, but you really don't, because that's all it tells you. It's just critical. And you think, maybe I could filter some of these alerts, maybe I could ignore some of them, but you really can't, because it's already got your attention. That alert already has your attention. And so you can't really ignore it because you're still thinking about it anyhow. Worst case, this is one of my favorite alerts here. Worst case, you get woken up and you have no idea what the hell to do. So read this, it might be a little bit small up there, but my favorite thing is in the additional info category. It says critical, thanks. Repeats critical, thank you. Nothing was checked. Something is wrong. Please check. So you're telling me that some engineer is either trolling me right now, or somebody was probably on call and just scrambled to write a check that's telling me I need to go check. It's not very useful. And this is just as bad as a noisy alert, because noisy alerts, they're getting your attention all the time. Something's going wrong, something's blowing up, you need to address it. This one I tend to think, I can ignore, but again, it already has my attention. So now I have to put some time and energy into deciding whether or not this is something that needs action. So I'd like to ask all of you, what do you think makes good context? Just a couple ideas from the audience. What do you think makes good context? What sort of action to take? Okay, that's good. History? Ooh, that's a good one. That's a good one. Let's remember that one. Anybody else? Business effect. Business effect? Okay. All these folks are plants, by the way. It's a great segue. All right, here are a few things that could be useful, and they're easy to implement. So we talked earlier about thresholds. A lot of our checks are threshold-based. They're very, very simple. I think it's really, really helpful to show in the alert notification what the current value is relative to the threshold. And that could be useful, because imagine our threshold is 10 something. It doesn't matter what the unit is at the moment. And when the check ran, the value of this thing was 11. I just tipped over the threshold. Okay, but what if the value is 1,000 while the threshold is 10? That tells you that the severity of the issue is greater than you initially thought when you just got the alert and said it was critical. Gentleman in the back said, what's the business impact? Exactly. So why do I care? I already know that I'm on call. I already know I'm going to get woken up, but it's still nice to know why this is a big deal. And that's important for a number of reasons. It helps motivate you, number one. But if you've got to communicate with other people, especially on the business side of the house, helping people understand what's wrong and what that means, right? Is a site on fire? Is there some specific function in my application that users can't operate? These bits of information are definitely critical in communicating the impact of the problem, not just to you, but to others. Is this an early warning indicator? Is there potentially some downstream effect? Is there something else that's dependent on this component that's alerting? Again, the idea of the gas light in your car. Your car is not going to break down, but in 30, 40, 50 miles, or however many kilometers, so we can do some quick math, however many kilometers that is before you run out of gas, you know that you need to take some action before you get to that point. And this is one of my favorites too. What did the author think about when they wrote the check? What did they care about? What sort of context did they have when they wrote that alert? So some other things that you could use to add context into your alerts. There's some common patterns. You can draw on some ideas, some visual effects that everybody just tends to get. For example, at least in the U.S., these are stop signs, and I think traffic lights are pretty much universal, right? When I'm driving and I come to a stop sign, I don't have to sit there and process, here's a stop sign, you need to start slowing down and eventually come to a stop. It's automatic. I see that red octagon. I know what I need to do, and I do it. Same thing with the green traffic light. I just keep speeding on through, right? Because red tends to mean things are bad, things are broken, things have stopped. And green tends to mean things are good, things are operating, go. So color can be extremely powerful in conveying information, right? Here's a great example. My son, every day at school, he gets graded, effectively, green, yellow, and red. It means, did he keep his hands to himself? Was he listening to his teacher? And he gets this sheet of paper to bring home to mom and dad. And if he's at a green day, this is fantastic, right? And he gets to color it in. But he's a kindergartner. And he doesn't always want to color it green. So luckily for mom and dad, there's some secondary context there. Right? I actually have to read that it was a green day because blue, purple, they get even better than this, bless you. Sometimes they're purple with silver streaks through them. Sometimes they're freckled, whatever. Mom and dad always have to read it. So this is, in contrast to using patterns that, using color to convey information, this is a clear indication of when it doesn't work. So the message here is that if you are going to use color as context in your messages, it's got to meet expectations, right? There are some things that are probably universal globally. There might be things, in various countries where different colors mean different things, or there's different information you can convey. You have to make sure that when you use color, what you're doing is meeting people's expectations of what that means, especially for those of you that cannot read this right now, especially for the colorblind. I have a coworker on my team who's red-green colorblind. So whenever I'm building a dashboard or I need to set some colors in an aggregated graph, for example, or I'm building these alerts, I'll send it to him. Can you at least discern the differentiation between these data points, these visual elements? If you can't, well, I go back and try things out. And there's some useful tools. I've got a link in the resources slide at the end. There's some useful tools that help you figure out what the best contrast ratios are for various colors, especially for people that might have issues reading things that are low contrast, people that might be red-green colorblind. And in fact, there are all sorts of different color blindness, which I was not aware of until I went looking for this image. And going back real quick to the discussion around the traffic lights and the stop signs. With the traffic lights specifically, position ends up having just as much importance as the color. So again, for people who are red-green colorblind, they may not necessarily be able to discern that this color is red, this color is green. However, they know that the light at the bottom is lit up, and that is the go light. Right, so especially when you're using color to give information, don't forget to provide secondary context as well. This is good right here. There are entire dramas, I say backstories here, but there are entire dramas hidden inside your alerts. Right? Something broke one time, probably lots of times. Hopefully you had a postmortem. We're all having postmortems, right? I don't see anyone nodding their heads. That's a different session. We'll talk about that later. Someone sat in a room, a bunch of people sat in a room and said, you know what, this thing might happen again. We should write a check for this. And the conversations they had, the story that went into developing that check, if you can expose some of that in your alert, you're adding additional context that helps the operator decide on what to do. There was an idea about, over on this side, about adding some information about what sort of action to take. Well, when you solved that problem, just before you wrote that check, that's a good bit of information. Hey, we solved this problem by running this command, right? You can better codify that by putting it in a run book in your wiki somewhere and linking to that run book so the engineers they see that alert, they click on that and they go see, these are the common things you might do to address this particular alert. Because if you don't have that, if you don't surface some of the author's intentions, it's like watching episodes, the Star Wars episodes 4, 5, and 6. Because back in the day, someone thought that was a better part of the story to tell. And then several years later, they released episodes 1, 2, and 3, and you got to see just how annoying Jar Jar Binks was, right? Everything that led up to that. And so all this that we've discussed so far gets me really excited because computers can and should do the work for us. Computers can augment the operator. I'll tell you why. I built a fire pit in my backyard. I like to light things on fire, usually firewood, usually logs. One day I ran out of firewood, and I couldn't remember where I had purchased it from. So I fired up Google and said, Google, show me where the closest nurseries are that sell firewood. And Google knew that that day happened to be Tuesday. And Google knows that I don't really want to go to the store when it's closed. So despite having all this information on the screen, Google decided to put most of it in the background, effectively, and then highlight and focus my attention on what today's hours of operation are. I thought this was fantastic. This is exactly the sort of thing I want to see in my alerts. There is going to be a lot of information coming at you, but when we're adding context to our alerts, what we're really trying to do is focus the operator's attention on the things that really matter, and everything else might be useful, but focus the operator's attention on what is the matter, especially when you're waking them up, especially when they've already got a hard enough time, because cognitive load is a thing. Whether you're working and you're in the middle of your head down working on a project, writing some code, whatever the case may be, you get an alert, you have to context switch. You have to switch gears, and the amount of energy it takes mentally to go from where you're at in one place to addressing alert is high. It's probably just as high, if not worse, when you're sleeping, because you're going from 0 to 60 like that, and you got to get up, and you got to get moving. So I came across this paper by a gentleman named Doug Engelbart. It's called Augmenting Human Intellect. I haven't read the whole thing, honestly, because after I read the first sentence or two, I was hooked. Like, this is definitely going in the presentation, because this is all I need to back up what we're talking about here. And he says, augmentation is about increasing the ability of a person to approach a complex problem situation, gain comprehension to suit one's particular needs, and to derive solutions to those problems. So let that sink in for a second. Mostly so I can get some water. So what he's saying here is we want to enable faster resolution by helping the human wrap his or her mind around what's happening, around what the situation is. And how do you do that? I think about what I would do whenever I get an alert, what sort of things I want to, what graphs and dashboards I want to look at. What are the first commands I'm going to run when I SSH into that system that's broken? And similar to this, I started thinking about OODA loops too. How many people are familiar with OODA in here? Okay, a little bit. This is great. OODA stands for Observation, Orientation, Decision, and Action. And it was developed by Colonel John Boyd in the United States Air Force, primarily to help describe what goes through a fighter pilot's mind during a dogfight. So you're taking in all these external stimuli. You're understanding what's happening in your environment. You've got to make a decision about what to do next, and then you have to execute. And he believed that the tighter and faster this process, this loop was used, the greater the chances that you would shoot down your enemy before they'd shoot you down. But I think it's not only applicable to what happens in the cockpit. This sounds to me exactly like what I go through whenever I get an alert. And I would posit that our monitoring systems straddled the observation and orientation phases. A little bit more on the observation side. They're out there running checks, checking the health of our systems, making sure that performance is within certain service levels. But we can tell our monitoring systems to help orient us more with the information that they've collected. And what Colonel John Boyd said was that the second O, orientation, as a repository of our genetic heritage, cultural tradition, and previous experiences, is the most important part of the OODA loop. This gets really exciting because this is exactly where we will augment our operator's attention. He says your heritage, your cultural traditions, and in fact your biases, The things that you bring to the table, when you think about a problem, how you frame it, that's what he's talking about right here. The things that you're already thinking of. Red means bad. Green means good. We can use these to our benefit, right? And I agree. I think it is the most important part. Making the decision and acting, those are relatively simple phases, or simple parts of that loop to accomplish. But you need information, and you need to understand what's happening around you before you can get there. So we can rely on known patterns, provide appropriate information, appropriate context to help augment the observation or the orientation phase. We're simply augmenting orientation. How do we do this? I'm going to focus on Nagios. That's what we use at Etsy. I think a lot of people do use Nagios. But these ideas we're talking about are not necessarily Nagios specific. They'll apply to any monitoring system. This is what I think of Nagios, right? A couple chuckles. But what I mean here is Nagios it's a commodity platform. It's got a general purpose. It gives me the building blocks to do what I want, to fashion my own monitoring system. And you, dear operators, you're the A-team, right? You're smart, highly skilled, plucky, very creative. You can take that system and you can make it into whatever you want, right? So where do we add context? How do we've talked about how we can add context. Where do we add context? You can and you should do it inside your Nagios checks. So the thing that's checking the status of your systems, making sure the performance is within certain service levels, it's closest to the action. It has the most access to additional information that you can gather. So when you write your checks, think about if a certain condition gets met that would normally alert, can I just fire off one more command and then spit that out in the output? And if you've only done that, you've already gone a long way towards augmenting the operator and their ability to orient themselves around what's happening. You can do this just prior to the alert notification as well, using a tool we released called Nagios Herald. This really, really excites me. Let's talk about Nagios Herald real quick. Actually, for the rest of this presentation, we'll talk about Nagios Herald. Hack Week last year, I was at Etsy for probably a couple months. I hadn't really been to a Hack Week before. I didn't have any ideas around what sort of things I wanted to work on. And I was talking to John Allspaw, and we were both talking about an alert. He says, it'd be really great if I could just get a graph inside my email. So let's take disk space, for example. Everybody hates disk space alerts because they're usually not actionable. But being able to see that not only did this thing alert on disk space being low, if I could just see what the growth was over the last 24 hours, that would be useful. Did this spike because something's running and is blowing up a log file, or it's not cleaning something up? Was this something that just happened, or has this been gradual over the last 24 or more hours? That sort of context would be useful because it helps you figure out what you want to do next. So I wrote a proof of concept script. It pulled some graphs out of Ganglia, or we're happy. And then a coworker came to me, and Nassim was his name. And he says he'd like to help work on this project. He thought it was interesting too, and I just thought it was a kind of a neat hack. But thanks to Nassim, this thing has turned into a formal software project that actually, works. Which is important because I'm in operations. I just write code that gets the job done at least once. Nagios Herald is because Nagios gives you these building blocks. You can write any sort of notification script, whether it's and in effect Nagios Herald is simply a notification script with some extra features built into it. And the power in Nagios Herald is derived from the formatters. So because Nagios Herald operates as the notification mechanism in Nagios, it has access to all of the environment variables that Nagios sets when just prior to a notification being sent out. So the formatters flesh out the content. They'll highlight, they'll colorize text, however you think you need to focus the operator's attention. But then they also call on helpers that can query Graphite, Ganglia, Logstash, even Splunk, to bring in additional external information. So recall that I recommended adding some additional content into your alert output when the check runs. If it can run DF for you, have it do that and spit it out to Nagios. Nagios Herald can then take that information and do some really interesting things with it. There's only one limitation in Nagios Herald, I believe, and that's your imagination. Because honestly, it's not a panacea, but and I've got some examples of this later on. People are using this tool now in ways I never imagined. And that's what's really the most exciting. People are bringing their own issues, their own alerts to me and saying, how can we add more context with Nagios Herald? I'm like, I don't know, you tell me. Like, what do you want? What's good context for you? And then this tool helps people make that happen. So briefly, the configuration here in Nagios, this is an example of defining Nagios Herald as the notification command. And wanted to highlight the formatter argument. That basically tells Nagios which formatter to use, because you can have multiple formatters. If you've got a check disk alert, you can have a check disk formatter that formats the content specifically for that. If you've got something that checks memory, same thing. And rather than specifying each individual formatter, you can use Nagios's, Nagios allows you to set custom variables. So what we're doing here is we're defining that the formatter is always going to refer to whatever value of the message formatter name variable is. If that formatter doesn't exist for whatever reason, Nagios Herald will fall back to a base. But here you can see at the very bottom of this example here, the message formatter name variable is set to check disk. So when this check runs and provides output to Nagios, Nagios Herald can then load that particular formatter and do all sorts of amazing things, such as, well, not yet. I'm going to show you a really ugly disk space alert. Can anybody read that? No. There's a lot of text there. It's really hard to parse. Sure as hell is hard to parse at 3 a.m. when I get woken up. Oh, this is the good stuff. Look at this. As soon as I wake up with one eye open, I know exactly which volume is having a problem. Right at the top there. There's also a nice ganglia graph showing me that this thing just started creeping up over the last 24 hours, probably a little bit longer than that, but it wasn't a spike like we were talking about earlier. There's some DF output there too, and what's really cool about that is that Nagios Herald colorized that for me. It's orange, and it's telling me which threshold got triggered. That's really useful. Finally, I think someone mentioned putting in frequency. Yeah, look at that. You and I are on the same page. This is great. Nagios Herald can query logs, or it can query Elasticsearch, it can query Splunk, and we feed all of our Nagios logs into Elasticsearch. We can tell, and we tell Nagios Herald, just give me some information. I picked a week. Tell me how many times this alert has fired over the last week. If this is the first time, I've got a lot more work to do to figure out what's happening. If this thing has fired 6 times before now in the last week, I don't know, it sounds like a cron to me, right? It's gone off one night every week potentially, or at least on average. That helps me figure out because it's helping me orient. It's helping me figure out which decisions to make, which things I'm going to check next. Here's a few more examples here. This is CPU alert. It's, again, a lot of, I don't know, maybe there's something going on with a single process that's blowing up. I don't know. I'm confused. But I know that the first thing I'm going to do when I get this alert is I'm probably just going to log into a system and run PS. Let's have the check do that for us, and Nagios Herald can colorize this, right? So I've got this check running PS, sorting by the top 5 processes by CPU utilization, and Nagios Herald colorizes that for me. But wait, now this is a mocked-up version. But wait, there's more. The problem isn't that, I want my systems using processors. I don't buy systems just to have them sit idle. But I'd like to know when they're using their resources in a way that may not be advantageous. In this case, Nagios Herald's clearly pointing out that the CPU is waiting on disk. That's useful. And not only that, I don't know, there's some joker running PS in addition to what Nagios Herald is doing here, and that seems to be using up a significant portion of processing power. So I've got, at a glance, a lot more information than I did previously. In a similar vein, here's a check memory, or memory check output. Same, again, I want my systems using memory. However, I want to know if this joker Larry is running a really heavy TMUX session and sucking up all the available resources. Yeah, he's in the back. Yep. These are simple examples, right? Colorizing text, as we talked about, helps to focus the operator's attention. The ones that really get me excited are alerts like this. We have a number of checks where the alert designers said, we've got all this data in Graphite. We really care if within the last 5 minutes, 10 minutes, an hour, the sum of the data looked a certain way. Or if there were no data points, it doesn't matter. We want to query Graphite and say, is the data that you have within the bounds of the thing I care about? If not, why don't you just go ahead and embed that graph in the message? But further, why don't we go ahead and show the last 24 hours as well? As you can see in this example here, everything's moving along just fine. It looks pretty normal. All of a sudden, there's this spike right at the end. That is not normal at all. But that little bit of information helps me understand the severity of the problem. Because the terms warning and critical, those are arbitrary. Whomever has written the alert gets to decide what they think is a warning and what they think is critical, right? And they probably did a really good job of determining what those levels are, but there's a lot of variation in between those two levels. And having this sort of context really helps clarify what the problem is. How many people use Elasticsearch here? Yeah, a good bit. So you ever notice when you ask Elasticsearch how it's doing, it says green, yellow. What the hell is that? And I think what's happened, Lisa, initially is people mapped there's green, yellow, red, and people would just map those responses to okay, warning, critical, and call it a day. And that worked initially, but those things mean something, right? And if you look up the documentation on Elasticsearch, it actually tells you that if the cluster's health is yellow, you've lost one or more replica shards. Well, that's useful information. And if it's red, you've probably lost, you've definitely lost one or more active shards. That's also really useful information. In fact, I would like to know which of those things I've lost. So this is another example where the check that asks Elasticsearch how it's doing, if it encounters a non-green response, it then queries another Elasticsearch endpoint and says, can you tell me about the indices that are having issues so that when I get this alert, I know where to focus my attention. And there's a lot of good info here, but there's also a lot of text. So we wrote a formatter for Nagios Herald that colorizes this. Right? Gmail's doing something a little funky. I think I have a couple lines that are over some character limit, so it's wrapping. But you get the general idea. Most of the indices are fine. It's that one at the top. And I know exactly who was working on that index yesterday and forgot to clean up their work. So I can go and talk to that person and say, hey, can you help me out? Get rid of that index if we don't need it anymore, or can you go fix that? Because we're working in a fluid environment all the time. Lots of people are touching these systems and doing things with them. This right here, because I've now focused my attention, I'm saying that a lot because that's really important. I want to focus the operator's attention. I have now made a snap decision about what to do next. I know exactly who to go talk to if I've been working with my team on this particular issue. That means in this case, I didn't have to do any work. I just had to identify the problem based on the output here. And so I've taken, it's something that can be as complex as Elasticsearch. I've taken that complex issue and helped the operator navigate so fast. This is a recent addition here, this last example. This one really gets me excited. The performance team monitors, we have a number of pages, but the performance team selected 5 pages they think are the most critical pages, right? The home page definitely being one of them. And they wrote Nagios checks. They're checking the response time for these pages. And if the response time is outside defined internal service level, then the performance team wants to know about it. So someone came to me, she says, I'd like to write a formatter for these alerts to provide some extra context. So we started with the graphs. You can clearly see on the left-hand side in the last hour, what the performance was. But over the 24-hour period, you can see this nasty spike. And she says, well, sometimes what we've noticed is that when we have these issues, someone has just fired up an experiment. And I'd like to embed that in there. And that's exactly what she did right at the bottom. This is stellar. This is fantastic. Because not only can you see the performance, and you look at the top, you clearly see it's the home page. And the PERC 95 is 824 milliseconds. That's already useful. But it's 10% above the alert threshold? That's even better. Because I know just how far beyond the threshold this thing has gone. Which means I know just how severe the issue is. But the really, really stellar thing is this formatter goes and queries an internal service that we've developed that says, surface for me which of the experiments are related to this page that got turned on in the last hour. So now if this alert fires, we can go find the engineer that pushed that code and say, can you help us and resolve this issue a lot faster? This is one example of people using Nagios Herald in a way I never ever imagined. I never ever thought about that sort of context to add. But somebody who was already dealing with that issue had and was able to do this with Nagios Herald. I think that's fantastic. So I need your help. I need all of you to write formatters because the problems you're solving are not the problems I'm solving. Nagios Herald has a bunch of built-in formatters already for some common checks, but I'd like to see what you all have. So if you're not already, you should probably go out to this Etsy's GitHub page and clone this repo right now. I need tests. Actually, we need tests because this is your project now, right? And we need more documents. Folks like Jordan Sissel and Lindsay Homewood have said that if documentation is poor, it doesn't help you get this project up and running in short order, that's a bug. If something's not clear, that's a bug. So if you read the docs and you see something wrong, send me a pull request. I'd love it. I've got a couple of other ideas for some things I'd like to do in Nagios Herald, but if you want to talk about them later, fantastic, because I've got office hours 5 minutes after this. I'll be at table C at the O'Reilly booth in the sponsor pavilion, and I would love to hear what sort of issues you're dealing with and how you are solving them, and if potentially something like Nagios Herald would be useful to you. And finally, a couple of resources here. I'll get these slides up for everyone to read later on. But if you want to know more about alert design, my ideas on alert design, you can hit that blog link there. Color contrast ratio tool is also available, the one I referred to earlier. Engelbart's paper on augmenting humans is a good read. It was written in 1962, by the way, and it's still highly appropriate. And then OODA loops. Sounds like a cereal to me, but it's really interesting to dive into OODA loops even more, especially in the context of augmenting operators. And that's it. Any questions? Great. Thanks.